but good to go. And you will, I'm just imperfect because I'm not up to the task which Jonathan gave me, I fear. So this was to try and oversee the thoughts and collect together the recommendations for updating the IPCC communication strategy and implementation note. So I've paid careful attention to everything I've heard. I've had feedback from the communication strategy rapporteurs, and thank you very much for that. And I'm sure we'll have a dialogue over the next week. The problem is, as you will have all have seen, a lot of the recommendations have been put up already today are relevant to the communication strategy or to its implementation plan. They're not. They may also be recommendations to the panel, but so somehow these three categories have got to be teased out. Unfortunately, the way in which, at the moment, we haven't had enough of a communications dialogue among the rapporteurs, I think, because some people say, well, actually, none of those are relevant to the communication strategy, and other people say all of ours are relevant to the communication strategy. I just want to recap and say the communication strategy has 8 subheadings. These are the goals, the principles, the activities, the audiences, governance and management, methods and tools, IPCC spokespeople, and resources. And then following on from that, there's an implementation plan which essentially takes a lot of that stuff and it puts it into 15 pages plus a very nice flow diagram. And if I look at what those headings and listen to what I've heard, goals, principles, activities, and audiences, it's actually almost already in there. It needs a bit of firming up, it needs a bit of tweaking, but the wording is not bad actually at the moment. Governance and management, I don't think we've actually touched on, and maybe that's okay, but that's something I think to flag to Jonathan. Methods and tools, we've got lots of that, but that really is implementation plan, not strategy itself. IPCC spokespeople, again, we've not really touched on that aspect as phrased in the current communication strategy, so we need to look at spokespeople perhaps as in a broader sense. And then finally, the resources, yes, we touched on. So I think we've got lots of material. It can be put together, and we have to just figure out the best way to do that. If anybody thinks I've been offensive about the process, I'm very sorry about that.
Does anybody think she's been offensive? Questions, comments, objections?
Leo!
Leo!
Of course you do! Leo and I have a long history of mutual respect.
Well, I have to disappoint you. I agree with everything you
said. Oh,
said.
Leo, no.
Just, I think that the implementation plan, first of all, the communication strategy, I think is quite good and covers most what has been said, but indeed needs some here and there, some adjustments and some rewording. The implementation plan, I think, is a very technical document of internal IPCC communication, which I think should be reviewed by the inside people, but maybe less interesting for the outside people how actually the work within the IPCC is organized. So given time and priorities, I suggest to give priority to beefing up of the strategic part, but leave the implementation plan for the insiders.
Okay. Other comments? Yeah.
I'll turn this on. Per Espene. I'll take a little bit step back and ask, what are we really doing in terms of the little bit bigger picture? Because the amount of influence that IPCC has had in terms of the Paris Agreement is truly amazing and a big success. Of course, the big problem is it took 25 years to get there. And what does this mean in terms of going forward? Because in one sense, it's a big success. On the other hand, it's probably the biggest science communication in history in terms of not getting across a basic message to large audiences in democratic societies. It's not a matter of getting the information out. It's really a matter of how do we communicate so that we go past information into engagement that is required. And I'm not sure if we have really if I hear from you what you said to be provocated, so that this strategy is good enough, and now we've done the necessary revision, we've tweaked a little bit here and a little bit there, have we really done our job? And I'm not sure, because I don't think we really touched on the major barriers that we are up against in order to really acquire a tipping point shift in attitudes and understanding.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Andreas?
Thank you. Yes, I would also like to add on that a little bit, because looking at all what has been presented, to me there is somehow the emphasis perhaps not always correct. Because it seems to me in these last 2 days we have sort of focused on outside of the primary target of the work of IPCC, which is okay. But we must not forget the primary stakeholder for which we, as IPCC, has a mandate to work for, and that is UNFCCC. And I think without an explicit thinking about what happened, in particularly in the form of the structured expert dialogue, which was the first time happening, I would claim here that the Paris outcome might have to be considered here. IPCC has not doing the best, and I dare to say that as co-facilitator of the structured expert dialogue, in order to help that structured expert dialogue optimally. And unless for AR6, IPCC is also explicitly thinking about that, how to better do that on their side, we have no warranty that similar communication in form of a dialogue, that was the important thing there, will happen again. Because there are also a lot of risks associated with that kind of dialogue which we had. And that is something where I think it is clearly within the mandate of IPCC. And I'm just a bit worried. Maybe it's okay, but unless, and that's why I wanted to bring it up here, unless what then comes out from this workshop and when it is written, I would really like to sort of hear that we must not forget the major stakeholder for which IPCC is working.
Okay, thank you. One last comment from Jean-Pascal, and then Pauline will get a chance to respond.
Thank you very much. I'd like to disagree a little bit with what Per said on the COP21 being the largest communication failure about a scientific issue. Well, the longest gap between what you meant, if I understood well, is that there was a very long gap between the IPCC work and the implementation of the outcome of the IPCC work. But in a sense, we are in a very specific situation. The mandate of the IPCC is to be relevant without being prescriptive. And I think that given that mandate, which is a very straight jacket, the outcome is remarkable. I mean, in a sense, we are like a physician who is allowed to diagnose a thickness, to comment on a list of potential treatments, but who is prevented to prescribe a specific treatment. Now, but think about another group of physicians, those who diagnosed the lung cancer and the link between tobacco usage and lung cancer. And look, even though for them it was very clear in the scientific literature for a very long time that tobacco usage was causing lung cancer in many cases, look at the time it took, even though they were allowed to prescribe when we are not in IPCC. Look at the time it took to change the legislation in so many countries. In many countries, it's even not done today about tobacco usage. So I think we have been extremely successful. On the contrary, given the constraint we have in the mandates to be relevant and not prescriptive.
Thank you.
I think we have to take into account the forces that are there to sow doubt about what we are doing, what John Cook was talking about this morning, and which is decreasing significantly the effectiveness of the communication we are doing about our work.
Okay. Pauline, would you
Okay.
like to respond?
Yeah, that's sure. Well, I'll leave that particular dialogue and response to itself, and but I thank Jean-Pascal for saying that very more eloquently than I would have done. Just to pick up a little bit on the point that Per made, and I think also what Andreas was saying. I wasn't, sorry if I was misunderstood, I wasn't trying to say the communication strategy is fine as it is. As Leo said, it needs beefing up, if you like, for want of a better word. I think it's actually a mistake to make the, we don't want the communication strategy or the suggestions for that to be so prescriptive that the panel's going to have difficulty understanding what we are trying to have them do. We need to provide simple messages about what it is that this strategy is about. It says very clearly in the current strategy, the primary customer is UNFCCC. Now, it needs to have some context to that now, I think. I mean, that's my personal suggestion, which adds in the context of Paris and so on. That, I think, there's no doubt about that. And then in the implementation part, you can get into some more detail about that. So I think there's no in addressing the point, which I think you very eloquently made over there as well. So I think it's, it's kind of, we're getting there. That's it.
Thank you very much, and that concludes the.
Go on, clap.
Okay, go on.
Melinda. Get on with it, Melinda. Thank you. Oh,
And then since I opened up with Nick, I'll open up with Co as well.
I just want to make a small point, which was that I think what we were doing here at this meeting was not to reinvent the wheel, but to see whether we could put a pneumatic tire on the wheel, or whether the wheel needed and maybe whether 4 wheels were needed or 6. I mean, I think we all agreed from the outset that the evolution of the communications and outreach of the IPCC, with the help of many hands, is far better today than it ever has been. And I do think that one of the key things that is going to shape this communication strategy from here is precisely what the IPCC and member states think they are going to do with AR6. And I think there's a whole conversation to be had about what the relevance of that report will be in a post-Paris world, which is beyond this meeting, because we don't know exactly how that debate is going to go. Once that is shaped, I think there's room for a very intense debate on how you then communicate it and how you actually deal with all these platforms and all the other issues that we've talked about. So I think that this is a good stepping stone towards a next meeting when that is being refined.
Co?
Yeah. Jean-Pascal, I think you made some excellent rebuttal points to Per Espen's comments, but I took them to be slightly different. And I think there is still a need for us now to evolve in our abilities to take, for example, the science of communicating science more firmly into account in our processes. And I think we learned over the course of these days that there are some fairly simple things that we could do and that our authors could do that would really help in the further communication of our efforts. So I just didn't want that point to be lost.
Thank you. That concludes the wrap-ups of the breakout groups, and now we will just have a short Twitter report, and then I think Jonathan will formally close the meeting. Nina, would you like to come up here?
Okay, hi. So quickly for the wrap-up of today's tweets. So we had a lot of anticipation and engagement from the room, but also from outside. People were inviting other people to follow the meeting live. And also we had some comments on all the discussions presentations that were happening here, again from the room and from outside. And the most tweeted event, of course, was this one. No surprise. So also today we gained 50 more followers on Twitter, and the number from my colleagues on how many people watched us live, and it's actually on the page views, so 1,604 page views for the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.